Hey, welcome to Now We're Talking with Doug Pagitt. This could be one of my favorite podcasts I've ever put together. No, let me check that. This is my favorite podcast that I've ever put together. Sometimes when you do these podcasts on a regular basis, you just catch a break. And for you than it might ever be to any of your listeners. And, well, that might be the case here, but it's so meaningful to me. I'm sure it's going to be enjoyable for you. It's a conversation that I recorded last Thursday in Los Angeles with Zonneveld and Barry Taylor, two people that I just have the highest of respect for and think so highly of. And we put together a dinner conversation. Ani works for a group called Muslims for Progressive Values and is one of my heroes. Barry Taylor has been a friend and a teacher of mine for a decade and a half, and I love his spirit and his mind. And we put together a dinner conversation. It's a part of an effort that I'm engaged with called Common Good Christians, and we ask people to host a monthly dinner at their house, a dinner party, and then they can watch a video people at another dinner party, ones that I host in the last couple of months, including this one. So we record that and then we stream it live on the internet, and people can have a dinner party and then be encouraged by the conversation that happens. So that was the project for Ani and Barry and me, was to talk about, could religion be a force for good in the world that we live in? So we sat around a table. There's some people in the background. We were at a rented house in Los Angeles, and the three of us had an hour-long conversation. It didn't have much of a script to it. We said, let's sit together, we'll record it, video and audio, and then we'll play it for this dinner party. And it was spectacular. Like a lot of dinner parties, we start to loosen up over time as we go. We get a little bit louder as the wine flows a little bit more. And we just had a great time. There were such wonderful things that Ani and Barry both said. We end with a song that I had asked Barry if he would sing. It's a song that I'd heard him perform at a meeting a few days earlier, and thought that it fit our conversation so well. And so it ends with that. And sometimes the audio gets to be a little clanky or a little loud because we're doing it live in a house party style, unedited and pulled together. So I think it's worth listening. It's sort of the bootleg copy of this fantastic conversation. So here it is. I hope you enjoy it as much as I do. It's Ani Zonneveld, Barry Taylor, and me. Enjoy. Hello, Doug Pagitt, Ani Zonneveld,
hi,
Barry Taylor, and a group of friends in the background that are part of our Breaking Bread conversation. Common Good Christians has tried to put together conversations that we think will be helpful for you as you host conversations in your place. So I will do brief introductions and we will jump into the conversation. Can religion bring about the common good in the world that we live in right now? So Ani, I'll give a brief introduction. You can say more specifically about what you do. Ani Zonneveld runs the Muslims for Progressive Values organization and is also, I know you don't like to be called an imam and I don't like to be called a pastor, but there's
an imam with a small I.
An imam with a small I. So you have a community here in Los Angeles of people that are trying to find your way to justice and goodness and life in Islamic tradition, a progressive Islamic tradition?
Yeah, that's right. Progressive Islamic tradition, yes.
Barry Taylor is...
hello, Doug. Long
hello,
time
friend.
no see.
Barry lives in the UK and in the United States.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it?
You're a world traveler, originally from England.
Yep.
You've taught in art schools, art and design schools.
Sure.
I consider you a master teacher.
Really?
I think the world will as well. You've taught at Fuller Seminary. Have pastored churches and been with communities of people and are trying to find ways of justice and goodness in the world?
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Fair
I'm
enough.
Doug Pagitt. I pastor a church in Minneapolis called Solomon's Porch and run an organization called Greater Things that helps bring this about. Okay, so here's the question. Ani from a progressive Muslim tradition, Barry from a creative, artistic, and outside of the norm Christian approach. I consider myself...
Nicely put, Doug.
Thank you. I consider myself to be a progressive evangelical, which a lot of people don't think exists. Like they may not think progressive Muslims exist.
Exactly. It's an oxymoron, yeah.
Is it possible for there to be common good that comes from religion in the world that we live in? Ani, would you mind giving us an initial response?
Yeah,
to this?
actually, I'm going to start with a cheers to the wine as a form of expressing that common good. So, cheers.
Cheers.
To a good conversation. Well, actually, in the introduction itself, you already underlined the conversation when you talked about social justice and the social good. That's precisely what I find the true meaning and the true words of the Quran. It's about social justice. It's about undermining the corrupt system of the day 1,400 years ago. And unfortunately, it's straight away from that. It's become a ritual. It's become institutionalized religion, which it wasn't supposed to be, really, because being a Muslim is believing, it's not a new religion. It clearly states that in the Quran. It's about believing the previous teachings and prophets and books. And to be a Muslim is to believe in what was previously revealed. So we have that common good already. We have a common lineage. And so I don't see a conflict in being a Muslim and having wine and you know, fraternizing.
Should we talk about that?
Sure. Absolutely. What about it?
If we're going to go with stereotypes, the sense in which good Muslims don't drink, perhaps, like good Christians perhaps don't drink.
Yeah.
I don't know. English ones do, I think.
Well, actually, in the Sufi tradition, they do a lot of drinking, and you know, there's a lot of poetry.
Is that the tradition you're in?
Yeah. No, I'm not a Sufi. I just consider myself a Muslim.
Sure.
I'm traditionally raised a Sunni, but that's all man-made, right? It's a man-made construct. But a lot of Muslims have come to the conclusion that as a Muslim, it's forbidden for you to drink. However, it talks about wine. It talks about being cognizant of the decisions that you make. It's not about forbidding alcohol, right? It's really about being of sound mind. So how it became, how it started becoming forbidden is actually through the secondary text, which is really interesting. It's called the Hadith. And so there was this man who drank. He drank himself piss drunk, right? He walked down the middle of the street of the town and started slandering people, living people. And the Quran is very clear. Slandering is worse of a sin than murder. All right. So this man was slandering you, slandering Doug, I was so drunk, and so that's the problem. And because of that, the Caliph of the day whipped him for punishment. So the punishment wasn't because he was drunk. The punishment was because of his slander. But Muslims have become, we have been lied to through the centuries, and our mullahs and teachers have taught us, no, you as Muslim, you are forbidden to drink. But it is not. It's not about alcohol, it's about sound of mind, because actually medicine, marijuana, a lot of things also, take away that sound of mind. And Islam is really big on sound of mind. That's the story.
Ani, we've been talking earlier today, too, that people watching don't have access to, but it struck me how, for you as a progressive Muslim, you are thinking hard about how the Quran leads you and how you can be committed as a Muslim to the teaching of the Quran through all the other cultural struggles. And as a progressive evangelical Christian, the Bible's narrative is really powerful and important to me. But a lot of progressive people believe for themselves, and this might be true for them, so they assume it for others, that the way to be progressive is to leave your religious tradition behind as you sort of move away from the religious strictures and dogmas and myths and fairy tales and all. And so for people who see themselves as progressive and rooted in their religious tradition, this question about can religion be a part of the common good, for some of us, roots us back into the text, maybe in a different way than what some conservatives would have And Barry, I know you've thought a lot about that too.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it obviously, well, perhaps not obviously, but it has a lot to do with how you see those texts, what you make of them, where you fit them in the scheme of things. I mean, essentially, they're words on paper, but we grant them authority. We say within certain religions, this is our sacred text. It's not sacred to everybody, but it's sacred to those who hold it dear. But then there are the various ways that we understand the notion of what that sacredness might mean. For some people, they think God wrote that book. You know, like God sort of auto-wrote through a person, and every word, therefore, and they'll quote you the Bible back to itself. So with a lot of, as you and I know from experience, with a lot of conservatives, they'll quote St. Paul and say, you know, all Scripture is inspired by God, forgetting the fact that when he was writing that, the book didn't exist in the way it wasn't yet Scripture. He wasn't talking about what he was writing. He was talking about, you know, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, what we call the Old Testament. So I think there are varying degrees, and how you view the text, and how you grant it authority to speak to you, has a lot to do, I think, with what you make of what's in there. So.
And it depends on the lens from you, right? I mean, as a progressive Muslim, when I read, or progressive Muslim in general, read the Quran, we see love and compassion.
Sure.
But when our conservative and radicals read it, they see punishment and the angry God. Yeah. So.
Because it's a text, and everything is interpretation.
That's right.
And so I've said this a number of times, coming from England and then coming to America, you know, so one of the big differences that I noted early on between Christianity in England is you couldn't go to a conference in England if there wasn't beer being served. It just didn't exist. But in America, you know, there was, especially in early, you know, there was a real sense that alcohol was a bad thing. And you quote your little Bible verse, you know, be not drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit. But of course, there's always a counter verse. Let the poor get drunk to forget their trouble. It's just as much a legitimate thing to do. So you can always play your own particular game, construct your own little set of ideas from which it comes. But and of course that has big impact on then how you live out your relationship to the rest of the world. You know, you can read the book and think that it builds a wall around you and makes everybody else excluded and an outsider, or you can see it as a way in which you're meant to actually live out and be open without borders or boundaries. But in this day and age, when there's so much both freedom and limitation on how religion is expressed, because on one level, nobody needs anybody to tell them. We can read for ourselves. But you also have people telling you the way it is, who claim certain authorities and things like that. I think, like many people, when I first got involved in religion, you take the equipment they give you, the language, all the things that you're supposed to, you sort of believe what they tell you you're supposed to believe, because they're the ones in the know. You know nothing. Then you spend the rest of your life divesting yourself of all of those unnecessary
So meaning
things.
that they gave it to you processed through the equalizer, through the chorus, and through all this technology, and then what you do is just like give it to me dry,
Sure.
right? In musical terms.
Yeah.
That's how I like it. Give it to me dry, right? No fluff, no cultural baggage, none of that tribal interpretations. I just want the text as like pure that
no such
applies
thing.
to
I mean, you know, Feuerbach
Yeah.
said all religion is social production, which was picked up by Marx. And you know, obviously, from that perspective, to kind of critique religion in general, and to maybe diminish it. But nevertheless, all religion is social production. That's why there's so much difference, because culturally we create our religious. Nick Cave, one of my favorite singer-songwriters, says that that words are the blankets that we throw on the invisible to give them shape. So we throw words, God, it's a blanket. It's a blanket that we've thrown on what's actually inexpressible. But then that word begins to attract interpretations and meanings, and it begins to coalesce into a thing that may or may not be. It's really just, it's a blanket. And what's under the blanket is still hidden, really. But
as a progressive evangelical, Jesus' teachings are rooted in my faith, and that's how I try to express myself, is through a lens of following God in the Jesus path. And this is what you see in Jesus, saying things like, "You have heard it said, but I say to you." And the things he said, that when he refers to that, "You've heard it said," such and such, are often phrases straight from Moses, right? Getting at this idea of, there's social construct, right? And so when you hear it and it's told to you in a certain way, it does carry power, but there might be freedom that comes from a deeper understanding of that very same idea.
That's right.
So Jesus says, "I say to you," and it's easy for those of us who revere Jesus to say, well, he gets to say that sort of thing. But in the text, you're supposed to see him as a bit of a rebel and an outsider and
he totally was.
And a breaker of those rules.
Right.
Not a keeper of them.
But then he's domesticated by the people that allow him to be a rebel only within the constructs of their religious horizon.
Those who created that image, right?
Yeah. So I
tamed him.
So there's a power of this battle of authority. I mean, that's what it so often feels like to me, is that there's this, and if scriptures, whether they're the Quran or the Bible, or for others maybe it's their particular religious traditions, doctrines, wherever those authorities are coming from, it feels like we're in a battle of authority. And for all of us, we're trying to navigate how to be of any good for those who don't want to give over power to that authority. Right?
It's very easy. Don't give them the bloody authority. Create your own authority, create your own space, create your own community. I don't even play their game. I don't play their rules. You made up your own rules. Okay, I'm going to make up my own rules. That's all there is to it. So at the end of the day, how many people want to play your rules? Now, our rule is loving, compassionate, inclusive, egalitarian. You want to play the exclusive, misogynistic, homophobic rule, go ahead. Join that club. That's all. It's really that simple. It's a competition of ideas. It's a competition of whose version of Islam, in my particular case, which version of Islam is the one that is most sustainable and uplifting. At the end of the day, people want to live a peaceful life. You cannot have it with a radical theology that dictates you, because that, as you can see, is very destructive. And the Muslim world is imploding.
Well, I think what I would actually want to say is that it's that you can with a radical view, but not with a fanatical view, because your view, in a sense, is quite radical.
Yes.
Your view that says, just do it.
Yes.
That's a radical move. The fanatical move is the move that says, my way is the only way. And I think that's the sort of whole challenge with...
Well, it's really nice is that you're actually describing radical as being nice people.
It's a positive.
If I was going to sort of out myself in any sort of particular school of thought, I would say that the school of thought theological thought that I spend most time in is the world of radical theology, which is really an attempt to get down to the roots of and the essence of whatever lurks in the text. And that, for me, it's what lurks in here that I'm most interested in. The surface do's and don'ts. I don't think we even need religion for those things anymore. I really don't. I think, especially in the West, I think because of the relationship to belief in the West, religion is option. It's not. I mean, I guess you can be, like, you're born Jewish, you're born Muslim. In a sense, you're not born Christian. You are, but you aren't. You know, it doesn't have the same.
I think in Alabama,
doesn't have the
technically
same
you are.
cultural
Yeah.
associations, and particularly I think in Western culture, the rejection of institutional religion over the last 150 years or so. You know, that growing diminishment of interest in that hasn't negated the fact that most of the backbone of Western culture, like the things that are to be prized, you know, openness to all people, freedom for people, and things like that. You know, the things that we now champion as universal human rights. A lot of that you can sort of find your way back into the sacred text to get. But to some degree, religion is simply you're either into it or you're not into it, and it's preferential. So for me, I don't think we really need to be told, don't do this and don't do that. For me, it's the haunting things, the kindness, because the world doesn't really. I mean, we champion kindness,
Yes.
but we don't really prize it. There's a sense in which somehow, if you're kind, you're a little bit weak.
Yeah.
There's a writer that I like, Adam Phillips. He's a psychoanalyst from Brittany. He wrote this book called On Kindness, and his sort of argument is that it's the thing that we look for most, but it's the thing we're actually the most suspicious of, and the thing that we think is a sign of weakness, really.
Yes.
So, but that's a ghost. It's, you know, it's a. I remember once I took a bunch of students, theological students, to hear the Dalai Lama, which was a big stretch for some of them.
Yeah.
Dalai Lama, after a very long intro and lots of Tibetan Buddhist rituals and stuff, gets up and his opening words are these: "My religion is the religion of Jesus. I practice kindness." No brainer.
Yeah.
Till we get back to the classroom. That's not the religion of Jesus.
Oh.
Meaning, of course, and I understood what they meant. What they meant was, well, that's not enough.
Yes.
It's not enough to be kind. Anybody can be kind. But I would say, exactly. But we're not.
Yes.
We're not kind.
Actually,
that's
it's not easy to be kind.
No, it's not easy to be
It's
kind.
not easy.
But you could do it, is
Or
what you're
else-
saying. The capacity is there.
The capacity is, and that, but what I was trying to say is that's what haunts the texts for me.
Yeah.
Those things like those almost ephemeral things, like
But it's
love and
elementary.
mercy. It's elementary,
Yeah.
but we're a long way
We're
from it
no,
because
absolutely.
we're immersed in these cultural systems that champion greed and disparity
Yeah.
and inequality, while at the same time giving a nod to generosity and stuff, but always wrapped around these.
Or a generosity, but with strings attached, right?
There you go. That's a
Yeah.
good way. You say things really well.
Ani, I'm interested in your interpretation of. I hear people say, well, one of the reasons that there's a radicalization, a fanaticism within
Thank you.
Islam.
Thank you.
Fix that word. A fanaticism within Islam.
I am going to eternally be grateful for that. Seriously.
You're going to start going around saying I'm a radical Muslim, and that
Yes.
means a whole different thing now.
Yes.
I like that. The reason there's a fanaticism, some people will argue, and I've certainly I've heard myself say this, is the kind of poverty and struggle in the way that the West has put its pressure on Muslim countries has caused people to rise up and to turn to their religion. Sort of the opposite of we have everything we need and we don't know how to be kind.
Yeah.
It's a narrative that says, well, social system is what's created a fanaticism within Islam. But I've heard you talk and say, well, that may be true, but there's also some other fingers on that, like those of us in Christianity would say. There's people who are tweaking this code to try to gin people up
That's
into anger and frustration, and they're telling a story that's not true. How do you think about that?
The best way for me to tell you is to tell you a story. So when I was little, I was living in Egypt for about 5 years. There's a lot of poverty in Egypt. And I come from a privileged family. You know, my father was an ambassador, Malaysian ambassador, and we were posted in Cairo. So we walked in down the street, poor people everywhere. And he was a father with a child, and he was eating his bread, this, like a pita bread, right? And he saw us walking, and he offered me half the bread. He tore half of it and offered it to me. That is the only piece of bread he had, and he offered it to me. That's the Arab that I know. Poor, but not angry. Okay?
Yeah, I see.
So what made them angry? That's the politicization of Islam. It's the use of Islam to rile these people up. You are poor because of X, Y, and Z. You are poor because of the West. The West supports your tyrant, which is true, right? And America has done harm in that regard. Politically, foreign policy-wise, absolutely. We have not really lived by our values. It applies to us, but not to the rest of the world, or certain people only. So that's the angst the Muslim world has. But for some Western Muslims, pin it on Western American imperialism. I completely disagree with that narrative, because at the end of the day, the Muslim world has been independent from the British. Malaysia has been independent from the British for many, many decades, and so has many other Muslim countries. At the end of the day, your situation, your failure, the state failures, is the doing of yourself and your own state. It's not the doing of the foreign policy, of the foreign Western state. That's my position. And I know enough about foreign policy from a young age to come to that conclusion at the end. Because Malaysia was doing very, very well as a developing country, as a colony of England. And we had our independence late 50s. And we were one of the economic tigers, and one of the few economic tigers that was of Muslim heritage. And the Arab world, the Muslim world, looked at Malaysia as an example of, wow, this is a Muslim country that is grown economically and is a powerhouse for such a small country. And that was because we had good leaders. And that was because we had honest, non-corruptible leaders. But that's not what we have now. And so what has happened to Malaysia in the last 10 years is that we have corrupt political leaders that have now used religion to prop up their position. So they've used religion to say Islam is superior, it's a supremacist, and we dominate and we are above the Hindus, the Buddhists, the Christians in Malaysia. This is not the Islam I was raised on. This is not the Malaysia I was raised on, but this is what it's become. Right? So I can give you a perfect example of what Malaysia was and what Malaysia is today.
That is a terrifying thought for some of us who feel like we live in a country where there's a corrupt government that has given way to a religious narrative that wants to separate people, and we're looking around saying, that's not the world I grew up in and the world that I want. At least it wasn't that way as brazenly as it is now. Well, you each gave presentations in this class that we're doing out here today, and without having heard one another, you each talked about how important it is for you in your own thinking about faith in the world we live in, that coercion, forcing it on someone, is not the ultimate outcome, right? So, Ani, you mentioned that in the Quran it advocates that
freedom of religion, yes, absolutely.
That the Quran advocates for freedom of religion and that compulsion.
Verbatim, there is no compulsion in faith. How can you argue with that? Why is it the Quran says that in the Muslim world it's completely the contrary, that people are thrown in jail, killed for converting out of Islam? I mean, we advocate for those sitting in jail that are accused of blasphemy, that are accused of apostasy. We advocate for their lives, for them to be released, and we do appeals using sacred text to appeal to the kindness, the compassion of the leaders to, come on, man, this is what the Quran says, let the guy out. You know?
And Barry, you pushed hard today to say that we should find a way to be free to drop any of the pieces that encumber.
Well,
Thich Nhat Hanh, I'll interrupt you for a second and then let you finish this. Thich Nhat Hanh, who influences my Christianity significantly, has these 14 precepts of engaged Buddhism, and one of them is no coercion whatsoever, especially on children. Jesus says that kind of thing, like, let the little children be free, and if they come to me, they come to me. Let them come to me if they want, but don't keep them and don't force them. Yeah. This idea of forcing. So my question, I'd love to hear your response to this, is there's a lot of people who hear about religious people talking about common good, and it can start to feel to them like it's coercion. So if they feel that it comes from a faith or a tradition or a religion that uses coercion for its outcome,
sure.
The fear comes, I don't know how to be about the common good without forcing my ethics or religion on other people. So it becomes a strange kind of privatism and turns the world over to fanatics. You see what I'm getting at? What are your thoughts?
Well, I have two things to say. Firstly, about the whole nature of religion. My read on Christianity is that Christianity is the exit strategy from religion, not the entry into it.
The exit strategy from religion.
Yeah, so I think that actually my read of the Gospels is that Christ comes to put paid to the notion that life has meaning and invites us into the meaningless of life by living life with meaning.
Okay, I've been drinking wine. Start over because other people may have missed it too.
I can give you a Muslim equivalent of that.
Really? Will you?
Yes,
okay, let's hear it.
And ultimately, that, and again, where I've spent a long time, like you know, around the business of religion, and a lot of time reading and stuff. In the last decade or so, I've sort of lived very closely with the Gospel of Mark, which is very interesting because there's not much there.
Meaning it's the shortest of the four.
Well, it's the shortest, but it's also, there's no birth story, there's no narrative, there are no angels, there's no shepherds, there's no Christmas story. You know, he shows up fully formed as a man, God speaks twice and then disappears from the text halfway through. You never hear from God after the transfiguration in the Gospel of Mark, and it ends not with a resurrection, but a tomb and a bunch of women running away scared. And it's so freaky they had to add stuff on the end to have it make sense. But if you read it, what it tells you, I think, is that there is an end to the business of the ritualization of life through religion.
Yes.
And an invitation to live in the world and to be in the world. So that's the one thing. But then with your issue about the common good, here's what I think the remedy is. Because religion tends to be territorial,
yes,
right?
Yeah.
We also think common good is the exclusive domain of religion. So the answer is don't start your own thing. Go work with people who are already doing good and just join your hands with theirs. And don't worry about who gets credit for it. That's how religion, I think, contributes to the common good. But if you want to name it and say, oh, in the name of
common good,
or the name of God, you know, or the name of Allah,
the name of
of
common
Jesus,
good Christians.
If you want to put a bumper sticker on it, then I think you have a problem because you're setting a precedent with your ideology.
Got it.
And again,
you're making it territorial.
Yeah, and so I think that the end game of Christianity is to just open up space, to make room for people, to be who they are, as they are, where they are, and what they are. And I know that there's a great tradition of evangelism in Christianity. You know, it's an evangelizing faith. But I'm not sure that it is actually. I think it's... Well, actually, I do. I think the good news is you don't have to do this. That's what, to me, that's why it's so... That's why we're always trying to go, well, what's the good news?
You don't have to.
You don't have to do it.
That's the good news.
The good news is, you don't need it. You just need to embrace the...
All invitation,
the
no coercion.
Find out
no
what
punishment.
the ghosts that haunt religion are and let them haunt you. The ghost of love, the ghost of mercy, the ghost of kindness.
Honey, what's the corollary that was coming to your mind a moment ago? Maybe you've thought to
And that's
move
me
on.
talking, that's 2 sips of wine.
That's 2 sips of wine for an Englishman. That's enough.
Let's have another one.
Let's keep
You're doing
it going.
good. You're doing good, Barry. It's really about, okay, so there is in the hadith, one of the few hadiths that I really like is when Prophet Muhammad is supposedly have said that to know yourself is to know God. And that is all about, you know, you doing contributing to society in the best way that you can, as God has created you, right? Whether it be music, whether it be a psychologist, whatever. So I think that for me, you saying that Christianity was an exit strategy for Christianity. Is that what you said?
Well,
for religion. Yeah. I see Islam as being the same way.
No,
No, that's Christianity. The only one. That's ours.
I said it first.
You're doing it again.
No, that's your
It's a little
territory.
fringe of competition.
But we
that
came
was
later. So we borrowed from you. Okay, happy? All right.
great.
Okay, we're
No,
good.
I think you're maybe leading the way on this one.
No, but beyond that, I think that I am around atheists, and I support atheists, especially those ex-Muslims. And I was in England last year, and
You'll bump into a few there.
yeah, but also Richard Dawkins, and how religious they have become on their anti-religion, and in my particular, it's anti-Islam and anti-Muslim. I'm like, people, I'm here to support your right to not believe. Why are you hating me, right? So it was really interesting how they just couldn't accept the good news, and the good news is that my belief in Islam is that the Quran gives me a mandate to support your right to not believe in anything. And even then, they had to fight on that point, right? It's trauma. I understand that, but it has become also a religion, and
it's belligerence as well.
Yes.
I mean, I think that theism and atheism are just two ends of a continuum.
Yes.
And hardcore atheism is not really, the only difference is the absence of a belief in God.
Yes.
But the fact that you are so vehemently arguing against that God is almost like a belief in and of itself.
Yes, that's right.
So I think part of the thing for me is I think getting off the theist continuum, it was an important step for me. But that's, and I know not everybody wants to make that move. That's a move that I make.
For me too.
For me, Christianity is materialist. I'm not into metaphysics. I don't believe in a supreme being in a supernatural sense.
And someone like you would even say, and the Jesus of the Gospel of Mark might not believe in that either, right? I don't want to put words in your mouth,
you
but
could put those in there.
I think that's what some people would say, and I would be prone to that opinion as well.
At the moment, I find spirituality, the term spirituality, a more powerful way of that resonates more for me than the word God or the word religion.
I think it does for a lot of people, doesn't it?
Yeah, and my husband is an atheist or agnostic. I'm not really sure where he's at right now, but he's never understood the word spirituality. And it's like, I'm not religious. He described me as religious. Like, wait. I got to correct. I am not religious. I hate that word because of the dogma and all that comes with it.
Yeah.
And then he said to me, then finally one day he was watching Neil deGrasse Tyson. And Neil deGrasse Tyson was describing the atoms and the metals in the environment and the universe, and how we actually have the same elements, right? And Neil deGrasse Tyson is atheist, hardcore atheist, and he was going, and here's Neil deGrasse Tyson describing our human body and how it connects to the universe, and he was going, it's even spiritual. And then at that point, my husband actually understood what I meant when I said spiritual.
Yeah.
And it took an atheist to explain that. And that's exactly how I feel connected to my environment. And I feel that the Creator is all. And that in itself is Islam, although that's not how we are practicing it. Because when we pray, we're praying to a direction, and we're praying in a dogmatic, in a prescribed way.
Sure.
That's not how Prophet Muhammad prayed when he received his revelation. He was meditating. So why are we not meditating, Muslims?
So I hear this a lot when a Muslim says, "I'm spiritual," they'll say, "Oh, are you Sufi?" Right? Is that right?
Yeah,
Is that right?
that's right.
That's the question, right?
Yeah.
And if a Christian were to say, "Oh, I'm kind of spiritual," they'll say, "Oh, are you a contemplative?" Right. Like we almost create this separate category.
That's right.
Once again, doing the territorial thing, right? Where there's some people that's their
Labels.
territory with a label, and they get the heading, and others of us then have to say, "Well, I'm not that, but I do that practice." It's the curious thing about religion in the world that a lot of us operate in.
It's not a religion; it's a human thing.
That's what I was going to say. We're always having to explain the human connections and say, actually, it's not even a religious thing.
I think what's interesting is that this whole conversation about spiritual, not religious, or religious, not spiritual, is a very recent conversation in the world of religion, because those two weren't separate for a long time.
Yeah.
It was sort of understood that if you were spiritual, you were religious, and if you were religious, you were spiritual. But now we've kind of reached this point, and I think it points a bit to the conversation topic that what I think it's an umbrella term. So when someone
Spiritual
says I'm
or
spiritual,
religion.
it can mean a whole bunch of things, a really broad spectrum. I like collecting leaves. I meditate. Or I have a looser anti-dogmatic relationship with a traditional religion. But I think what it tells us is that people, even people who embrace notions of the divine, have a problem with religion.
Yeah.
Hell yeah.
Because people committed to living life by precepts and practices that are connected to ancient traditions go, but I'm not religious. So even those who practice have a problem with the entity. And I think that's a really important thing, but I think it's a really contemporary issue. And I think it highlights the challenge that religions face in the 21st century, is that there are so many options, there are so many interpretations, there are so many yearnings, and there are so many possibilities not to be this or that or the other.
I think you touched on a key point, and that is it's a new thing, and I think it's probably, and I think you nailed it, because it's hard to really practice an old tradition that has gone back centuries that is unrelatable to the 21st century, right?
And usually it's not as old as people like to make it out to be anyway. That's particularly true.
You mean the particular expressions?
Yeah, the particular expressions, this ancient thing, and then you go, well, it's not quite like that.
Yeah.
But I think you're right.
But it's hard to catch up, you're saying.
Yeah, I mean, for young people, it's unrelatable.
And especially in mobile societies.
Yeah.
In fixed traditional societies where everything remains somewhat more prescribed.
Well,
you can understand.
it's also tribal too, right? Because
tribal.
it's how I was saying earlier on. It's like being part of religion is being part of. It's not just your identity as a faith, but it's also part of your tribe. That's your identity, and so leaving your religion means you're leaving your tribe, and that is treason.
Yeah. But you think about. I mean, not to exclude you, but So we've hovered around various incarnations of evangelical Christianity for the last 30 years. Let's say. And you can remember the evangelical Christians used to have a very negative attitude towards mainline traditional practitioners. They've not had their conversion experience.
Right.
That's right.
And then all of a sudden, like 10 or 15 years ago, suddenly evangelicals are reclaiming traditions they never had in the first place. Reclaiming ancient practices. Now, there used to be debates about whether or not you could have icon pick. I remember our friend Chuck Jr. Down in Orange County, he had the guy paint some icons in his church, and everybody went apoplectic because they thought he'd gone Orthodox or something. And then now you have people reclaiming ancient practices. We're reclaiming feasts and stuff like that, and then you have the whole transition to the sort of lateral move, like when you come to the end of evangelicalism, you go into liberal mainline Christianity and think you've made a move forward. But my point is that sort of meandering attempt to divest oneself of all the things that don't work, and seems to keep going back into into older iterations. And personally, I'm not sure that the past holds the key to the future. And there's this sense, I don't know about with Islam, I suspect it might be true to some degree, that there's a certain like being held hostage by the shadow of the past. Like if you move too far forward, you're heterodox or a heretic, rather than sort of, that's like my quote from Picasso.
Yeah, say it.
You can honor tradition by wearing your grandfather's hat or by having children. And both honor tradition, but one just keeps a smelly old piece of clothing around, and the other brings new life and
it's
new
going to go wherever
opportunity
it's going to go,
and a future. And I think if religion wants to contribute to the common good, then it's by birthing newness, new life. I really think that. That's not to say that historic tradition doesn't have anything to contribute. I don't mean that at all. I just don't think that you can only invoke the past as the way to understand your religion. If you can't bring your own world into dialogue with your faith, if that's what you want to call it, and have it coalesce and make sense, then
it's your irrelevant.
So you're just walking around trying to be a Victorian, which is what I think most
and this
Christians
is true
are.
in every religious expression. It's true in Islam. I mean, you're my greatest friend and example of that in Islam. It's true in Christianity. It's true in Judaism. It's certainly true in yoga. My wife is a yoga instructor. They're constantly trying to have yoga be a current practice and not an ancient tradition. Okay, part 3, if you were keeping track at home, of this conversation, at least as I am.
didn't know we had a part 2.
Yes, there was part 2 in there.
Somewhere.
You didn't know, but I did a little cut in the video and introduced this to them a moment ago.
All right.
This is how meta this gets. You're watching a live video that was recorded on Thursday, and then I know that it's been edited because I told myself, edit after Ani said that last thing. So anyway.
Really?
Yes. Part 3. So part 3. You are each engaged in helping communities think about the public good. So Ani, a few days ago, you were a speaker here in Los Angeles at the Women's March, and you talked about what Muslims for Progressive Values, your organization, does to advocate certain positions. You're very engaged about that, and your history is as a songwriter and a singer and a music producer, and you can say about who you've produced for, which I think some people watching this might find interesting, and who you've worked with. But you've decided and want to have influence in the public sphere. So what, will you say something about that? And then Barry, I'm going to talk about what you did in the song that I asked you if you would do here tonight.
I think that as an individual, as someone, I have the privilege, and I'm wow, I'm very lucky that I know who I am. I have found myself, and I can't say that has been an easy journey. But I'm 55, and I'm very happy with my life and what I do. And what I have found is that using music, being a public speaker, being a teacher in my own way, advocating for social justice in the context of Islam is my life path. It's not a life, it's not a job that I would retire from. It's in my DNA, it's what I get up for, even if there's no money, which I did for no money.
For a long time.
It is not about how much you're getting paid for it. It's because, you know what, it's a fire in my belly that I can't turn off. And I'm blessed. I really, truly am. And the common good that I feel as a Muslim here in America in particular, and I'm going to speak in the American context because of the audience, but is to show that there is a human rights perspective to Islam. And we call it the Islamic human rights language, which is so buried, have been undermined by radicalism. And what we do is brush it off and use that language for the greater good, for the common good of all people. And it doesn't matter what religion or non-religion you are, because it doesn't matter. It's about human rights. It's about human life. And that is a gift from God, because in the Quran, when you are in the mother's womb, around 40 days, that's when God blows his breath, her breath, its breath, them's, we don't have a gender of God, breathe the soul into the fetus, and that's when you become a being. So that's why when the Christians talk about we're all created in the image of God, it's another way of saying, it's God's spirit in us. And so that resonates for me. That is our common values. And our advocacy and my passion is really about human rights. And for me, it's irrelevant whether you're Muslim or not. I'm not here as a Muslim advocating for Muslim rights. That's not what we do. That's what others do, but that's not what we do.
And the speech that you gave at the Women's March that I watched, which is available online, and people should watch it in its own right. 3 minutes long, 3 minutes of Ani Zonneveld glory. You were calling for Americans to express American values that you feel are being eroded by religious tradition. So a religious Muslim leader calling for American spiritual leader, Muslim, a spiritual leader in the Muslim tradition, calling for calling for the people of California to express their truly American, inclusive passions. Like, that is such a. I know you recognize this. That's such a shift for people to recognize, but for you, that's not opposite of your faith and your calling. It's rooted in it.
Yes.
This is what I find so beautiful.
I think America and many of the Western states are actually more Islamic than the Muslim world.
Not in a good way, you're about to say.
No, in a good way.
Oh, in a good way.
Yeah. Because
I thought that
when you're talking,
no, wasn't.
you're talking about American, justice for all.
Oh, I see.
You're talking about.
And you're saying Islam argues for justice for all. That is not what most people think.
Of course it's not. It's not what Muslims think. Because for Muslims, it's my right. It's justice for me. I don't care about your justice. Well, it's that it's supremacy interpretation of religion. And I mean, I'm not the only one to say this. There's been many Muslim scholars throughout the centuries that have also recognized, they've gone from the Arab world, for example, to the West, and they say, oh my God, these people are more Muslims than we are. We call ourselves Muslims, but actually they are actually more Islamic than we are because of the values of caring for the poor, for the environment. These are all Islamic values, but Muslims are awful at it. So I'm calling, as an immigrant to America, I recognize the greatness of America. I recognize what we're starting to slip away, what we're starting to forget, what America truly is about. America at its core has great foundations, and because of the influence of religion, the extreme right, and the use of religion, their particular interpretation of religion, in legislation that harms the rest of us. And my comparison at the speech was, well, how is that any different than Sharia law that you so condemn?
Yeah, you're so afraid of.
Exactly, and so afraid of, because that's what the Muslims do too. They legislate laws based on their interpretation of Islam, which is misogynistic and discriminatory, right? So how are you any different? So
you're
I
not,
call
you're not going
that
to pull out a pocket constitution right now, are you?
No, I'm not. I should.
Like Khan at the
yes,
Democratic.
I know, right? But basically, I define it as a Christian Sharia law, and I say it publicly, and a lot of Christians don't like that.
Yeah, and you're really pushing some buttons.
I am.
By that.
And they need to reflect on that.
Yeah. Barry, when you were leading a conversation on a church service, a Sunday service, a gathering of people on Sunday that I went to here in Los Angeles.
Yeah.
Where was that?
We actually do it in a church, which is the irony. But that's the intention.
A little later in the day.
Yeah.
You did it in this church. You led this. You gave a talk. And by the time I got there, things were wrapping up.
Yeah.
But I heard a song that you and a really great collection of musicians, which I think were really quite quality musicians.
Yeah, not bad actually.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Professional quality.
Better than me.
But you were fronting that band.
Yeah, but
Unlike the other,
I'm the worst player in the band.
That's always the case.
it's always the case of the front person.
Totally.
Yes, by the way, you didn't tell us who you where you received your Grammy nomination.
It was for a Grammy CD. Sorry, it was for a contemporary blues artist, Kebmo. Yeah.
Kebmo. Yeah.
And so we collaborated on a project together, and I contributed a song, and so that was the project that won.
And it was Grammy nominated, and you got a Grammy certificate.
No, it won a Grammy. It won a Grammy.
It won a Grammy.
Yeah.
You're a Grammy winner. You're not a Grammy nominee. I see what you did there. I undercredited your. You were a Grammy award-winning
Contributed to an
contributor.
album.
Well, you're literally the only person I know who has won a Grammy. Congratulations.
Yeah.
And Barry, but with this Grammy capable band that you had there,
Nice segue.
at this church service, you all, and I've asked you if you would do this song now, but you sang this song there.
Yeah.
That I didn't see the words, but I could hear them, and it sounded to me like you were asking in that song. The thrust of the song was asking for good things for Los Angeles.
Yeah, well, actually, I didn't write this song, and unfortunately, I can't remember the guy that wrote it. He was English, and it's a song actually about someone who moves to LA, and comes face to face with the challenge of life in Los Angeles, and asks Los Angeles to be kind to him.
Oh yeah,
and
tell
really
me about it.
sort of wrestling through that dynamic, but. So at this thing that we do, it's actually.
And by the way, every good dinner party should have an Englishman reach over and grab a guitar.
Totally. Yeah. You just wish it was Keith Richards or somebody, though, not me.
I don't know who that is.
Yeah, right. So we do, I mean, it's not always a religious conversation. It's these days it's probably 40% and then 60%. We just talk about whatever is on, whatever, because I many years ago and I mentioned this a little bit in our class time together today. I really feel that one of the challenges is the compartmentalization of spirituality as something additional. You know, your spiritual life. I just don't believe in a spiritual life. I only believe it in life.
Human thriving kind of thing.
Really human. And actually, human not thriving. And part of our community is built on the fact that life is really fucking difficult.
You don't even have to thrive. There's not even that.
And life is difficult, and life is hard, and it's uncertain, and it's finite, and everything is contingent, and it's everything that religion tells you life doesn't need to be. And you know, religion promises you a future, and I think that there is nothing guaranteed. And so we gather actually to create. We're sort of creating communities built on uncertainty and unknowability and vulnerability, and we don't try and fix that. And we do two things with music. We let pop stars do our worship for us. So we do a lot of other people's music. And then we make our own music. But none of it is ostensibly religious in nature. So we just sing songs because I think music is emotional architecture.
Nice.
So it's the emotion of a song where the meaning is. You know?
Do you just wander around saying great lines like that to strangers in places?
Not very much.
Music is emotional architecture. And
I like that.
So anyway, and actually, I started singing this song because you know I've lived in Los Angeles for 30 years, and I just recently moved back to London, and so I was trying to in that group of people give voice to some things that I wanted to leave people with to some degree, and this song that I came across this song and sort of reworked it a little bit, and
this one here,
and sort of left it as basically my own sort of love song to LA.
Yeah.
Because I love Los Angeles.
Yeah.
I think it's a magical place. I really do. It's a hard place.
Yeah.
I think it's one of the more difficult places to be because of its complexity and what it's built on.
Yeah.
You know, it's built on the fragility of human dreams.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, there's not a crazier thing.
It's a land of broken dreams
to
out
build
here,
a city on. You know, what I mean?
Broken dreams.
And you know, and the architecture of the city, it's framed by people that came here to build things they couldn't build elsewhere. So it's a crucible for creativity.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you think about it. I was saying this to somebody today. I mean, the sort of Pentecostalism, mystical sort of modern Christianity birthed in Los Angeles, alternative spiritualities.
Yeah.
There's in the fabric of the city.
Yeah.
There is this. There's a haunting, and the haunting is about the magical bits of life, but they come with a price, and Los Angeles is there to remind you of the price. Los Angeles tells you how much it costs to even get a chance at your dreams.
Yeah.
And it's not just the rent;
Yeah.
it's the fact that everybody else comes here
Yeah.
and does the same thing.
Yeah.
So
I'm thinking about our friends that'll be on this conversation in New York. They feel similarly in those. And so everybody's in a town in which they know how that town breaks your spirit. Because they all do, don't they? Like you've lived. I mean, I know this might be something.
Breaks your spirit.
Life, it can do it.
I mean, that's.
Yeah.
I mean, this is why Freud was so vehemently critical of religion.
Oh.
Because religion often offers a fantasy escape from the hardship of life. We need escape. We need, you know, he called them palliatives. We need moments where we can get respite. But if you live, you know, it's like wine is okay.
Yeah.
Until it's not okay.
It's not okay.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or something. And I think religion can be the worst kind of. It becomes poison.
Yeah.
When it becomes escape.
Yeah.
So for me, the big transformation has been: what if religion is not escape but entry? Entry. That was from the Transfiguration. The religious in the group, Peter, James, and John, they want to build some tabernacles.
Yeah.
Jesus wants to go down the mountain, and what's down the mountain? A whole lot of trouble.
Yeah.
But that's where you live life, you know. So
I'm
I'm not a bit of an escape, you know.
Yeah.
And that's my big thing with America. I love American values, but I don't get that pursuit of happiness because I'm English.
Yeah.
It's like, you know.
That's so British of you.
That's why we had to rebel, because English didn't understand. Well, I just think about all the people who, when they hear you longing for the goodness of Los Angeles for others and the goodness in Los Angeles, to think about their own cities and the common good. And you've taught me so well that for Christians, they should think about loving the world and not thinking about changing the world.
Yeah, well, you can't really.
Yeah, you can't. Like, do
we
the
can't
thing.
change- we
Do
can't
the
change
thing.
ourselves, so
Do
we
the
think,
thing
you know,
you can do.
Yeah, which is be and love. And,
Which is so, for the Christian tradition, it's so, God so loves the world. I'm sure there's a corollary inside that.
and then
Quran.
remember the gospel of
No?
Amy. And then remember the gospel of Amy.
You can borrow that one. It's
Okay.
The Gospel of Amy Winehouse.
Yeah, that love is a losing game.
Well,
You never win when you love. There's no cure for it.
That's true.
Well, our closing credits, or for those from religious tradition, our closing hymn. What do they say about that? What's the name for the closing song in a
We don't have songs.
in any Muslim
No.
meetings? You're the only Muslim song
Yeah.
creator. By the way, Ani's created songs for Muslim communities and worship. Unless you want to sing one after we're done here, I don't want to put you on the spot. You can think about it. As
If you
this
play
goes.
left-handed guitar, you
No, I
can.
can't.
Okay.
You exhaust me, you know, billowing black exhaust smoke. And the smog won't wash from this unsuitable immigrant skin. Such a villainous grace, I don't know what you've done to your face. plastic surgery.
Wow.
And some nights I just can't figure out quite where your heart is. Oh, Los Angeles, be kind. No more trouble or red lights. I can learn to love you in good time. Oh, Los Angeles, Los Angeles, be kind. Well, I read you all wrong. I get drunk just to feel I belong. By a river so dry, it's barely a river at all. And we fuck one another all night, fire pistols and cover our eyes. As we waltz unseen behind Hollywood's ballroom doors. Los Angeles, be kind.
Be kind.
No more headaches or fist fights. Take me to bed and say goodnight.
Good night.
Oh, Los Angeles, Los Angeles,
Los Angeles.
oh, Los Angeles,
Los Angeles.
be kind.
Be kind.
No more trouble or red lights. Take me to bed and say goodnight. Oh, Los Angeles, Los Angeles,
Los Angeles.
be mine.
Be mine. Be mine.
I'm literally crying. I'm literally crying.
Hit him in the gut, Doug.
Oh my gosh!
Yay.
Thank you.
That was awesome.
Oh, to all, be kind.
Just be fucking kind. Actually, that was my closing. When I actually left, like when I departed for England, I said, "Here's my summary. Here's my summary of 30 years of religious life. Just be fucking nice.
Yeah.
You don't need to know anything else.
That's right.
You really don't." The end. I love you.
Good night.
It is that simple, right?
Oh.
Sorry about the swear.
Dan?